air filter. The most important thing on your air filter, most everyone is familiar with air filter and air box. Definitely, with all the sand and the desert. As far as services and problems I see day to day, almost everything is air filter related as far as running issues. I'll have some other problems, but I can't tell you how many times we'll open one of these up and it's just enough dirt to build a small motocross track. So keeping this clean is the number one thing, keeping your engine a lot healthier, longer lasting. Polaris's test is basically a drop test. Drop it on the ground. If you get any dirt, basically they want it replaced. I don't like blowing them out. You know, when you're on the trail, tapping them out is the perfect thing to do.
Okay.
You're not doing any damage to the pleats. Everything's gonna be fine. That's how I clean them, it's just like this. And another thing a lot of people miss, this little ring. This little ring is just basically to keep this soft foam from distorting. It's very important to keep on. There's a lot of air filters out there that are missing that. You take the possibility of ingesting unfiltered air, so very important to keep that on. On the newer models, you have these little steps, and you'll know when the air filter is all the way engaged because it's up against these steps. And then part of your air filter process, part of the air filter process is going to be your drain. This is going to be at the lowest point of all your air boxes. Yours is probably going to be almost in the same spot.
Okay.
And it's just a duck build shaped rubber one-way valve. It's to let water out, moisture out, and let nothing in.
Want to make sure underneath that it's clear.
You can reach under and feel and make sure it's still intact.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, you can feel that one.
Yep.
And what destroys them is dry rot from the bottom, and then mud or dirt just being stuck in them from the top.
Okay.
So as long as you can see in there and you can feel that it's in good shape.
Yep, the duct feels good, yep.
Yes, sir. And that will take care of our air box and air filter. Also, when engaging, this model has a flat face for the airbox lid to mate onto. Some of them have a tongue and groove style.
Yes, yeah.
Those can actually cause problems if you have dirt stuck in it. A little bit of dirt stuck down here at this bottom will unseal it all the way around. So making sure this area is clean. If you have any grooves, make sure they're not packed with sand.
Okay.
Next up, steering system.
Okay.
Which the first thing you're going to do when you turn on the ignition is you'll see everything light up, and you can actually feel your power steering working. Very important not to have your hand resting on this or torque on it when you turn the key on.
Turn the key on. Okay.
Sometimes that'll give you an error code. Most of the newer ones, they're smart enough to realize you just got your hand on it. But if you ever turn it on and you have a steering light that's still illuminated, turn your key off, wait for 15 seconds, 20 seconds, and then turn it back on and see if it clears.
Okay.
But that one goes right off. Got power steering. Other components I like to check. Let's see. Your tie rod ends.
Okay.
That's a high wear item. Luckily on the new Turbo Rs and Pro Rs, they're a lot beefier, a lot more metal, and we don't have to replace them as much. But the way you can check them, you can do it on soft or hard ground. Just get it to a spot where you can see and see if you have any play left or right. And then this jam nut right here is not something that will come loose often, but if anything is going to come loose on your steering after a good hard session in the desert or a bunch of whoops, that takes a good beating. So always just grab that and make sure it's
tight.
Make sure it's solid up against your outer tie rod. And another pre-ride inspection that's good for your steering. Let's see if I can get you in here. If you're mostly in the deserts, you're not going to have too much of a problem. But these boots tear easily. If you get off into the woods, a lot of sticks, a lot of
stuff down, okay.
deadfall, they will come up and they will take this out very easily.
So make sure that, check to make sure that doesn't have any tears or rips in it.
Correct. And it doesn't hold any fluid in there, but there is a small amount of grease. So I just take my hand and go around it. And if I don't have any grease on my hand, it's a good day. Front and rear suspension. This one, we'll start here at the driver's front. There's not a lot of components that you have to worry about coming loose on your suspension. You've got lock nuts, nylocks, top and bottom. But what you do want to check is you're just looking for oil residue on this.
On the springs?
On the actual shaft.
Right.
And when you have them sitting for a long time, you'll see a little bit of this residue.
Yep.
And that's normal. They call that sweat. You'll even have a little bit around this head area, which is fine and normal. But if you're actually getting enough to drip down here, or anything is dripping off, it's time.
Need to have service.
Yes, sir. It's time. But a little bit of sweat around here, or a little bit of sweat around here, just a small bit of residue, it shows up really easy because of the dust. But but it's perfectly normal.
Dust we have plenty of.
And with the newer live valve, I like to go ahead and check my plug-ins just as I walk around. You can just grab both sides and push and just make sure it's engaged. It's not too often they'll come loose or get hit with anything, but if you turn the key on with that disconnected or loose, you'll get an error code that we have to clear.
Okay.
So I like
Just to make sure that that's
that little audible click.
Yep.
That's what you want.
Perfect.
All right, next moving on to tires. Tires, you're gonna see a little bit of wear, uneven on the front of these. A lot of people will get worried if they start out wearing unevenly. It's kind of, when you have this much travel, it's gonna be very difficult to get a perfectly tracking tire.
Right.
So I do pay attention to my alignment. I don't want my machine pulling left or right. But if you see uneven wear on your tires, it's not really cause for alarm. It's gonna happen. But take a good close look between your lugs for any cracking, dry rotting.
Yeah.
And then you have another step on this one. Checking your torque on these outer lock rings.
That's bead lock.
Yes, sir. That's a bead lock wheel. Another common thing. This one is nice and protected, but valve stems will easily get damaged. You definitely want to make sure you have a cap on there all the time. One that doesn't have a cap, you will lose a lot of air pressure. If you've got the longer valve stem that sticks out, just make sure you're checking it. Bend it all the way over. Look for tears or dry rotting at the bottom. Wheels, lugs. We just kind of went over wheels. Lugs are one of my most important thing to hit. They're missed very often. Your first service, after you get a new machine or after you get a new set of wheels, first service is where you're going to see the most torque needed to get these back to where they need to be, because they're seating in. You've got a soft aluminum wheel that's compressing. I can almost guarantee after a good hard ride, they're going to have to be torqued almost a quarter of a turn. So I'm very big on torquing lugs. You don't have to have a digital torque wrench. You don't have to have anything special. Just any kind of set torque wrench. Because what we're after is the uniformity. If they're asking for 120 foot-pounds and you give them 110, that's okay if they're all at 110. So that's a big safety thing. I don't like having wheels fall off. Headlight, taillight. Headlight, taillights. Low beam, high beam. And most of this stuff is going to be pretty easy to check out. What a lot of people miss until you really need it is when you get out on the trail is the aiming of it. There's a lot of machines out there with the headlights pointing at the sky. It's really not too bad of an adjustment, but what you want on an off-road machine, a lot of people will set them like a street machine and just kind of level with the headlights at about 20 to 30 feet out, which is pretty normal for street legal vehicles. But when you get on the trail, you're hard on the gas, everything's squatting. it's going to be pointing up towards the stars. So I always bring them down to almost about axle line. If you're in
30 feet, right.
the best scale to do it is in front of a garage. Just pull your machine up to the garage, open the door, and at the back wall of the garage, have them about axle length, and or axle height, and you'll be great on the trail. Brake lights, hard to check by yourself unless you have a reflection. Often underestimated how important they are, but when you've got a lot of people on one trail, a lot of people in a conga line moving fast, those brake lights are very important. Brake system, number one check and the easiest one is you're going to be checking to make sure your cap is still on, you don't have any cracks or damage. Polaris does a really good job of keeping these protected, but you can see how if something got kicked up, a rock or a stick, and you won't really know about it until there's no brakes. Because a break or a crack here, you'll still get 10, 20 miles down the trail before you know you have a problem. So always start at the cap, make sure it's tight, make sure you don't have a lot of residual fluid leaking down. And the rest of it's going to be mostly visual. You'll see any problems in your line, any pinch spots or kinks. Unfortunately, most of these machines, it's really difficult to see the brake pads unless you pull the wheel off. So you can kind of catch an edge, but a good mirror, like a dental mirror or any kind of small reflective, any kind of tiny mirror is perfect for that. But yeah, this is one of them. There's not enough space on the front of the wheels to see. That's going to be your most common issue is damages with the lines. We'll do engine oil next. All right, next check up in the list, engine oil level. I don't like to do this with a cold engine. Every machine is going to have their steps, but you're always going to be safe if you do run it for 30 seconds, let it idle for 30 seconds. So just the 30-30 rule is what I go by, easy to remember. We'll see where this one ends up. That one's a little bit overfilled just over the top line. And I think they say the cold level just to standardize it, but 30-30 just works. It works so great on them. A common problem is a lot of people overfilling the oil, maybe not checking them correctly. What people don't realize is overfilled oil is worse than having no oil, or low oil or no oil. Overfilled, you're going to foam up quite a bit. You're going to cavitate your oil pump, and it'll be worse than not having anything. It's not easy to get to when it's hot, but I always like to glance at my oil filter. What we use is a set of sharp-jawed oil filter pliers from the side.
Okay.
And they make a few different styles, but the ones that have the really sharp jaws, you can put them at an angle because you can't get directly 90 degrees to this one. Even with this small spot you can see through here, making a mark on there, if you can walk through here and see that mark, you never have to worry about checking it for tightness. So a reference mark anywhere you can easily see it. Now's a good time also to check anything for leaks. Of course, you don't want to go doing this with a hot motor, but you can just look around below your water pump. Make sure you don't have anything chafing, rubbing, no sharp edges on anything. It's not common nowadays. They're really well built. I don't have a lot of issues with them, but sometimes you can get something like a corner here rubbing on an edge. Turbos also, you've got extra oil fittings. Check those, make sure they don't have a whole lot of drip or anything coming off of them. They generally won't sweat very much. You might have a little bit of dirt, but that's another one. If you see anything dripping, it's time to get checked out. And then let's see. PVT outlet duct screen. These are pretty easy to check on most razors. You can just walk around, make sure we don't have any tears, even though sometimes one's just going to be your belt intake, one's going to be your engine intake.
Are those pretty easy to replace?
They are. It's just taking the time to make sure everything is clean. They have
when you put a new one on.
Have a pretty delicate one-sided tape that's on them, and just dirty fingerprints will actually give you fits. So I like to clean this up really good and use gloves when applying it. And then you've got your outlet duct. Let's see if I can find a good access to it. The outlet duct for your belt is just going to be pouring onto your exhaust header. This is the duct. I'm just touching it with my light.
Okay.
And you can see that little bit of metal on the end of it.
Yeah.
That is the metal screen. Basically, you're just looking at a big open duct that everything comes out of, and then that screen is there, really just to keep rats from crawling in it.
Okay.
It's important to have it there. It'll catch belt pieces too if you ever shred a belt, but the most important piece, and the most important reason that's there is to keep animals out. And then spark arrestor. Spark arrestor, it's going to be retained here by a small 8mm bolt.
Yeah.
Around here, honestly, I don't have a lot of problems with them being stopped up. What stops them up is mud, water. If they're ever submerged or your water line is above here,
Yeah.
what will happen is all that water and mud will just hit that hot screen and turns into concrete instantly. You'll start noticing your engine sounds like somebody's holding a hand
Right.
over it. It's something I pull off on a 100-hour service and
Okay.
check.
Yep.
You'll have some carbon built up around it,
Yep.
but unless you're doing a lot of mud or water riding,
Right.
it's not something you have to worry about that
Okay.
often. What they're looking for you to check is to make sure there's no tears. Let's say coolant level, that's the only thing we haven't really hit. I think a lot of people take it for granted that their coolant's there, because what I have a lot of problems with is you go for a ride, good hard ride, you boil a little bit of this coolant out. It's designed so that if it boils over or gets really hot, it'll spit a little bit of the coolant out. And you also don't want to overfill it,
Right.
because then you'll make a big mess in the garage.
Okay. Yep.
And when you ride this after a good run, it's going to be a lot higher up, and then as everything cools and contracts, it'll pull right back down to the low spot. But that is something that can kill an engine within 20 minutes if that's too low and it starts to cavitate.
Right.
So very important to hit that on every pre-ride.
Okay.
And the last thing, they don't have this on the list, but I think this is one of the more important things that I deal with day-to-day: trail side failures, trailer failures, sitting in the house. The number one thing I find is loose battery terminals.
Mm-hmm.
Loose being subjective. One person's idea of tight is not another's, but my test for this is if I can grab it with thumb and forefinger and actually move it,
It's loose.
it's too loose. On these, you can actually go until the bolt makes contact, about right there,
Yep.
and then you can give it almost another
Quarter.
And that's, a lot of people are uneasy about doing that, but so there's my point of
You don't
contact
want it
right
coming
there.
loose, right.
Yep. You want to put a little bit of stretch on that bolt and compress everything. Oh, there we go. Maybe that work for you?
Mm-hmm.
Cool. So what I'll do is go to the point of contact right there, and then almost another quarter. And it is going to feel odd. It's going to feel like you're stretching that bolt, but every time you use this battery, every time your charging system works, these terminals get hot, and then they cool off, get hot, cool off, and you can have this perfectly tight ride for a month and come in here and just take them loose. So, well, that's the list. The main important things you want to hit, the most common things you're going to see is your battery. Tire lugs, I'll basically check those about every 100 miles. If you're doing 100 mile on a weekend, it's a good idea to check them.
Okay.
But like I said, after your initial break-in and setting in, they're not going to move a whole lot. But if you are getting movement out of your torque wrench every time you check them, might be cause for alarm just to check and make sure those bolts aren't stretching. But those come loose quite a bit, so I like to keep a torque wrench on them almost every ride.